Julian Mercer was not supposed to be awake. The medication schedule was precise, adjusted, approved, trusted. By this hour, his pulse should have slowed, his thoughts softened, his awareness dimmed into something pliable and forgettable. Instead, he was standing in the dark, barefoot on cold marble, listening to his own breath echo far too loudly in a house that suddenly felt hostile. The flight from Singapore had landed early. Julian hated early arrivals. They disrupted routines, exposed gaps. But tonight, exhaustion had overridden instinct. He had wanted his own bed, his own walls, the illusion of safety that came with familiarity. The estate lights were low when he entered. Not off, just dimmed. A detail he would have ignored on any other night. He had taken 3 steps inside when the world narrowed. A hand locked around his forearm, strong, unhesitating. Another sealed over his mouth before shock could become sound.
Julian's body reacted faster than his mind. Muscles tensed, lungs burned, heart detonated in his chest. He struck backward blindly, heel skidding on polished stone, and was pulled sideways into darkness. The door closed behind them with a soft, controlled click. Silence. Not the absence of sound, the demand for it. "Don't move," a voice murmured against his ear. Not whispered, measured. That was worse. Julian froze. Every instinct screamed, but something deeper, older, forced compliance. The man behind him knew exactly how much pressure to use, exactly how to hold him without leaving room for panic to become resistance. "If they hear you, you won't leave this house alive." Julian's heart slammed so hard it felt visible. The hand over his mouth eased just enough to let him breathe, replaced by a finger pressed gently against his lips. A warning, not a threat. Julian knew that voice. The realization sliced through terror with brutal clarity. "Marcus," he breathed. Marcus Hale, head of personal security, former military. The man Julian trusted with his life because he had never given him a reason not to. Marcus didn't respond. His body shifted subtly, placing himself between Julian and the thin crack of light bleeding through the coat rack. Footsteps approached in the hall. Julian's stomach dropped. 2 people stopped just outside the door. "You're certain the dosage was adjusted?" a woman asked. Her voice was smooth, cultured, familiar in the way childhood homes were familiar, even when they no longer felt safe. Evelyn Mercer. His aunt. The woman who raised him after his parents died. The woman who kissed his cheek every morning and asked if he'd slept well. "Yes," a man replied. "Same compound, slightly increased concentration. His tolerance has been inconsistent." Julian's vision tunneled. The dizziness, the nausea, the shaking hands he blamed on stress and travel. Not stress. Never stress. "He shouldn't still be alert at this hour," Evelyn said mildly. "We don't need complications." "There are risks," the man hesitated, "if his system crashes too fast. Then we manage the narrative, quietly. I will not have speculation interfere with the transition." Transition. The word hit harder than any blow. Julian's fingers curled into the fabric of Marcus's sleeve, gripping without realizing it. His own home, his own blood, and they were discussing his death like an inconvenient delay. The footsteps moved closer. Marcus shifted again, impossibly shielding, his chest solid against Julian's back. Julian could feel the slow, controlled rhythm of his breathing, an anchor in the chaos. "Give it another day," Evelyn said. "Increase the amount in the morning." Morning. Julian nearly laughed. The sound clawed at his throat, desperate to escape. Then the footsteps retreated. The voices faded. The hall fell silent. Marcus waited. Counted. Only when the danger had fully passed did he ease the door open a fraction, scanning the corridor. Then he turned back, eyes sharp, assessing Julian's face in the dimness. Shock. Rage. Something breaking open. "You weren't meant to hear that," Marcus said quietly. Julian let out a single broken breath. "That seems to be the theme of my life." Marcus's jaw tightened. "We need to leave," he said. "Now." Julian's thoughts scrambled. "My phone, we should call." "No." The word was final. "You trust the wrong people," Marcus said, and tonight confirmed it. Julian swallowed. His mouth tasted metallic. "How long?" he asked. Marcus didn't lie. "Months." Julian stared at him. "I suspected patterns, medical reports altered, access logs changed after review. I couldn't prove intent until now." The truth landed heavy and cold. "You knew," Julian whispered. "I suspected," Marcus corrected, "and I stayed close." They moved through the house like ghosts, taking a route Julian had never used despite living there for years. The halls felt narrower now, watchful. At the service exit, Julian hesitated. Leaving meant acknowledging that nothing inside those walls was safe anymore. Marcus turned to face him fully. "If you stay, you don't get another warning."
Julian looked at him, not as an employee, not as security, but as the man who had dragged him into darkness to keep him breathing. "Why?" Julian asked. "Why risk everything for me?" Marcus held his gaze. "Because I saw what was happening," he said, "and because I refuse to let someone decide your life is expendable." The door opened. Cold night air rushed in. Julian stepped across the threshold, the house closing behind him with a sound that felt permanent. Only when the car doors shut and Marcus pulled onto the road did Julian's body betray him. Heat flared beneath his skin, his vision fractured, the world tilted violently. Marcus swore under his breath. "Stay with me," he said, one hand steady on the wheel, the other reaching across to grip Julian's wrist. "You hear me?" Julian tried to answer. Darkness surged instead. And as consciousness slipped, one thought burned clear and terrifying. They had planned this carefully, and he had almost died without ever knowing why. Julian surfaced to sensation before sound. Heat first, too much of it, coiling beneath his skin like something alive. His throat burned. His heart raced in uneven, desperate stutters, each beat a reminder that it was still fighting. Voices reached him next, low, controlled, close. "Stay with me, Julian." The words threaded through the fog, anchoring him. Julian tried to open his eyes, failed. His lashes fluttered uselessly as the world spun, disjointed images bleeding together, streetlights streaking past, the interior of the car, Marcus's hand tight around his wrist. "You're not allowed to disappear," Marcus said firmly. "Not tonight." Julian wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he wasn't someone who disappeared. He was the one people waited for, the one whose absence caused panic in boardrooms and headlines. But his body had other ideas. His chest seized. A sharp, involuntary gasp tore free. Marcus cursed, low and vicious. The car slowed, then turned sharply. Gravel crunched beneath tires. The engine cut moments later. Cold air hit Julian's face. Hands were on him immediately. Strong, sure, lifting him from the seat. Julian's head lolled against Marcus's shoulder, his weight fully surrendered without permission. "Easy," Marcus murmured, adjusting his grip. "I've got you." Julian's awareness sharpened just enough to register how close they were. Marcus's arm locked around his back. His other hand braced Julian's ribs, fingers spread as if memorizing the shape of him. Humiliation flickered. Julian Mercer did not collapse into other men's arms. Except he had, and Marcus held him like it wasn't weakness at all. They moved through a concrete space, an underground garage, Julian realized dimly. The echo of footsteps swallowed what little sound they made. A door opened, closed. Warmth replaced cold. Marcus lowered Julian onto a narrow couch with deliberate care, easing him down as though he were handling something fragile rather than a man who once commanded rooms without raising his voice. Julian's vision swam. He focused on the ceiling, plain, unfamiliar, safe in its anonymity.
Water touched his lips. "Drink," Marcus said, slowly. Julian obeyed because he couldn't afford not to. His hands shook so badly Marcus had to steady the glass, their fingers brushing. The contact sent a sharp, unexpected jolt through Julian's chest, something electric, disorienting. Marcus felt it too. His jaw tightened, but he didn't pull away. "You're burning up," Marcus said. "This isn't new. It's been building." Julian closed his eyes. "How long?" Marcus hesitated, just long enough to matter. "Longer than you think," he said. "Shorter than it could have been." A pause. "You're lucky." Julian let out a breath that might have been a laugh. "That's generous." Marcus didn't smile. The fever rose as the night deepened. Time fractured. Julian drifted in and out of awareness, reality dissolving into fragments stitched together by sensation. Cold cloth on his forehead, Marcus's quiet footsteps, the faint clink of a glass set down with care. At one point, Julian surfaced just long enough to realize Marcus was kneeling beside the couch, his back against it, close enough that Julian could feel the heat of him through the cushion. "You should sleep," Julian murmured, voice rough. Marcus answered without looking up. "I am." Julian reached out blindly. His fingers caught fabric, Marcus's shirt. Without thinking, Julian tightened his grip.
Marcus froze. For a heartbeat, Julian thought he'd made a mistake, that Marcus would pull away, reassert distance, professionalism, the rules that kept men like them safely apart. Instead, Marcus shifted closer, allowed it. His hand settled over Julian's wrist, not restraining, just grounding. "I'm here," Marcus said quietly. "You're not alone." The words lodged somewhere deep, somewhere Julian had kept guarded for years. When Julian spoke again, it was barely a whisper. "I didn't see it." Marcus knew what he meant. "You weren't meant to," he said. "That doesn't make this your fault." Julian's throat tightened. "I built everything around control," he said, "around knowing the people closest to me." Marcus's voice softened, just slightly. "Monsters don't announce themselves. They blend in. They wait." Julian swallowed. "Why you?" he asked. "Why risk everything for me?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He stood, turned away, as if steadying himself. When he spoke again, the words were measured, but something beneath them had shifted. "Because when I realized what was happening," Marcus said, "I saw how alone you were." Julian's chest constricted, surrounded by people, yet completely unprotected where it mattered. The fever peaked near dawn. Julian's dreams were fractured, stitched together from memory and fear. His mother's voice from childhood, Evelyn's smile, Marcus's hand anchoring him to the present. At some point, Julian surfaced long enough to feel Marcus's fingers press gently into his shoulder. "Stay," Marcus murmured. The word wrapped around Julian's consciousness like a command and a promise all at once. Morning arrived quietly. Light filtered through narrow blinds, painting the room in muted gold. Julian woke with a pounding head and a body that felt like it had been wrung out. But the fire was gone. That absence unsettled him more than the pain ever had. Marcus was asleep in the chair across from him. Even in rest, his posture was alert, controlled. His head tipped back slightly, eyes closed, expression unguarded. Without the tension, Marcus looked younger, human. Julian studied him in silence. The faint scar near his temple, calloused hands resting loosely on his thighs. This was the man who had stood between him and death without hesitation. Julian shifted. Marcus's eyes opened instantly. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Alive," Julian said honestly. Marcus exhaled, a quiet release. "Good." Julian pushed himself upright, testing his balance. He succeeded, barely. Marcus moved to help, then stopped when Julian raised a hand. "Let me," Julian said. Marcus watched closely but didn't intervene. Something unspoken passed between them.
"You were poisoned," Marcus said finally. "Not enough to kill you quickly, enough to weaken you, to make your absence convenient." Julian nodded slowly. "And you stayed." "I stayed because leaving would have made me complicit," Marcus said. The words settled heavy and undeniable. Julian leaned back, exhaustion tugging at him. "There's something you should know," he said quietly. Marcus turned fully toward him. Julian hesitated, then chose honesty. "I'm attracted to men." No apology, no justification, just truth. Marcus absorbed it without visible reaction. "Thank you for telling me," he said. That was all. Julian blinked, caught off guard. "You're not surprised?" Marcus shook his head. "I noticed patterns." Julian let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Does it change anything?" Julian asked. Marcus met his gaze. "No, it explains you." Silence stretched, intimate, steady. "My loyalty isn't tied to your name or position," Marcus said quietly. "I'm here because I chose to be." Something shifted then, not declared, not named, but real. Julian closed his eyes briefly, not to escape, but to steady himself. For the first time since the night everything cracked open, fear loosened its grip. He wasn't just recovering from poison. He was waking up. Julian woke before dawn, not from pain, not from fear, from stillness. The apartment was quiet in a way his estate had never been. No distant footsteps, no murmured staff, no subtle sense of being observed even when alone. Just the soft hum of the city outside and the steady rhythm of his own breath. He lay there for several minutes, staring at the ceiling, letting awareness settle fully into his body. Weak, but present. Tired, but clear. That mattered. Marcus was awake. Julian sensed it before he saw him, the subtle shift of movement, the absence of sleep slackness. Marcus stood near the kitchen counter, half-turned, scrolling through a phone Julian didn't recognize. His posture was taut, alert in a way that suggested he hadn't truly rested even when his eyes were closed. "How long have you been up?" Julian asked. Marcus glanced over. "Long enough." Julian pushed himself into a seated position slowly. His muscles protested, but he didn't sway. That alone felt like a victory. "The fever broke, but the damage won't reverse overnight." Julian accepted the glass of water Marcus offered. His fingers were steadier now. "How bad was it?" Julian asked. "Enough that if you'd stayed another day—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Julian nodded. The truth no longer shocked him. It settled cold and precise, like a piece clicking into place. "There's something else," Marcus said quietly. Julian looked up. "Internal security is compromised. Not completely, but enough." Marcus's jaw tightened. "There are people still loyal to her, to the version of events she intended to control." Julian exhaled slowly. "So even now," Marcus confirmed, "we assume we are being watched indirectly." Julian stared at the window, watching pale light creep between buildings. "I spent years believing isolation was strength," he said softly. "Turns out it just made me easier to corner." Marcus didn't interrupt. I need to decide what happens next, and I can't do it from a place of fear. Marcus studied him. You don't sound afraid. Julian met his gaze. I'm not. I'm angry, and I'm awake. That earned a flicker of approval. The message arrived an hour later. A secure notification on Julian's tablet, one of the few devices he'd kept under his direct control. Annual Foundation Gala, rescheduled. Mandatory attendance encouraged. Julian read it twice. Marcus was already calculating. They're accelerating. They think I'm weak, or gone, or both.
Julian set the tablet down. Silence stretched, heavy with implication. If I don't show, Julian said, they control the story. Marcus nodded. If you do, you step into risk. Hiding almost killed me, Julian replied. Marcus studied him carefully. You're not fully recovered. I'm recovered enough to stand, Julian said, and to speak. This time Marcus didn't argue. If we do this, he said, we do it on our terms. That evening, the city dressed itself in illusion. Glass, light, elegance, wealth polished into something that looked like certainty. Julian arrived without announcement. The reaction rippled instantly, conversations faltering, heads turning, murmurs spreading like static. He felt it all, every glance measuring him for weakness. He straightened his shoulders. Marcus walked beside him, not behind, not ahead, a presence, not a shadow. Inside the hall, crystal chandeliers scattered light across polished floors. Music hummed, laughter rang too loudly. Then Julian saw her. Evelyn Mercer stood across the room, flawless in silver silk, her smile poised and practiced. When her eyes landed on him, it froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for him to see the calculation behind it. She recovered quickly. "Julian," she said when she reached him, her hand brushing his arm, "you look better." "Appearances can be misleading," Julian replied evenly. Her gaze flicked to Marcus. "Security should remain discreet." "Marcus is exactly where he needs to be," Julian said. Evelyn's smile tightened. "You should be resting. Your health—" "My health improved," Julian interrupted, "when I stopped ingesting unauthorized substances." The air shifted. Nearby conversations quieted. Phones lifted discreetly. Evelyn's eyes hardened. "This isn't the place. This is precisely the place," Julian said. "I was poisoned, slowly, quietly, by someone with access." A gasp rippled through the room. Evelyn laughed sharply. "That's absurd." "I have records," Julian said. "Medical discrepancies, altered logs, conversations that assumed my absence would be permanent." Security stirred at the edges of the room. Marcus shifted closer, his hand brushing Julian's wrist, a silent question. Julian answered by taking Marcus's hand openly. The reaction was immediate. Shock, whispers, flashing cameras. Evelyn stared at their joined hands, fury breaking through her composure. "What are you doing?" "Choosing," Julian said. Federal agents entered the hall moments later. Warrants were displayed, names spoken. Evelyn's composure shattered. "You would destroy your own family," she hissed. "I was trying to destroy you," Julian replied calmly. Cuffs clicked shut. As chaos erupted, Julian felt something unexpected settle inside him. Peace. Marcus leaned in. "Are you steady?" Julian nodded. For the first time in weeks. They walked out together, leaving shattered illusions behind. Outside, the night air was cool and sharp. Julian paused at the threshold, then stepped forward. Not alone, not silent. The world did not pause for Julian Mercer. By morning, headlines had already chosen their language. Betrayal, survival, scandal, reckoning. Julian read none of them. He stood at the window of the apartment as dawn softened the city's sharp edges, watching light spill between buildings like something cautious but determined. Traffic resumed below. People went to work. Lives continued as if nothing monumental had cracked open the night before. Behind him, Marcus was packing. Not hurriedly, not nervously, with quiet efficiency. Clothes folded, laptop secured, a bag that spoke of preparedness rather than escape. "You don't have to do that yet," Julian said without turning. Marcus paused. "I do," he replied. Julian turned slowly. "You could stay, at least until things stabilize." Marcus met his gaze evenly. "That's exactly why I shouldn't." Julian frowned. "Explain." Marcus zipped the bag and set it aside. "If I remain in my former role, every decision I make will be questioned, every action framed as obligation or influence." He held Julian's eyes. "What happens next needs to be clean." The logic was flawless. Julian hated it. "So you're leaving," he said quietly. "From the position," Marcus corrected, "not from you." Julian felt that distinction like a hand pressed to his chest. "I'm not walking away," Marcus continued. "I'm stepping out from between you and your life." The words settled slowly, heavy, necessary. Later that morning, Julian returned to the estate. The gates opened without resistance. The house stood immaculate and hollow, exactly as he'd left it, and yet entirely unfamiliar. Marcus walked beside him, not scanning corners, not guarding exits. Not because danger was gone, but because its shape had changed. Julian moved through rooms with new awareness. The dining table where smiles had masked calculations. The kitchen where his drinks had been prepared with careful precision. The hallway where a hand over his mouth had split his life in two. He stopped outside the closet. Marcus noticed immediately. "Do you want to avoid it?" Julian shook his head. "No." He opened the door. The space was smaller than he remembered. Ordinary, harmless looking, and yet it was where everything had ended and begun at once. "I thought power lived in places like this," Julian said quietly. "In how many doors you control, how many people answer when you speak." Marcus leaned against the wall, listening. "But power isn't that," Julian continued. "It's choosing not to disappear when someone wants you gone." Marcus's eyes softened. "That's a hard lesson to survive." They left the estate before noon. No staff, no ceremony. Julian took what mattered: documents, personal items, proof. The rest could remain as evidence of a life that no longer fit him. They drove without destination. At first, silence filled the car. Not awkward, thoughtful. Eventually, Julian spoke. "I've been asked to make a statement." Marcus glanced at him. "Will you?" "Yes," Julian said, "but not today." Marcus nodded. "Good." They stopped at a small cafe tucked between narrow streets. No photographers, no recognition. Just the smell of coffee and the low murmur of ordinary conversation. They sat by the window. For the first time in years, no one watched Julian with expectation. The anonymity felt like breathing after years of restraint. "You're thinking loudly," Marcus said. Julian smiled faintly. "I'm deciding what stays." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "My company, my work, those continue, but not the version of myself that believed isolation was strength." Marcus studied him. "I'm done hiding parts of my life to make others comfortable," Julian added. Something shifted in Marcus's posture. "That includes you," Julian said softly. Marcus set his mug down carefully. "I'm not something you owe honesty about." "I know," Julian replied. "I'm not saying this out of obligation." "Then why?" Marcus asked. Julian leaned forward. "Because when I imagine what comes next, You're there, not as protection, not as a symbol, as a man who chose me when he could have vanished. The cafe noise seemed to fade. Julian, Marcus said slowly, I know the cost. I do too, Julian replied. I'm not asking you to step into chaos. Marcus met his gaze. I'm not afraid of being seen. I'm cautious about being claimed without intention. Julian nodded. Then let me be intentional. Silence stretched, not empty, expectant. I don't belong to you, Marcus said. I know. And you don't belong to me. I wouldn't want you to. Marcus reached across the table, fingers brushing Julian's, deliberate, steady. But I'm willing to walk beside you, he said, without titles, without uniforms, without silence. Julian's throat tightened. That's all I want.
They didn't kiss. Not yet. The connection was already real. In the weeks that followed, the world recalibrated. Legal proceedings advanced. Statements were made. Apologies arrived from people who had never questioned convenience until it failed them. Julian stood firm, honest, unperformative. Marcus declined offers, consulting roles, private contracts, prestige wrapped in control. Instead, he stayed close, not constant, not possessive, present. One evening, weeks later, Julian stood in a new apartment overlooking the river. Smaller than his penthouse, warmer, filled with light and intention. Marcus joined him at the window. I used to measure success by what I could acquire, Julian said. Marcus glanced at him. And now? By what I refuse to lose. Marcus nodded. Julian turned to him. Stay. Marcus didn't ask where or how long. I'm already here, he said. This time, when Julian reached for him, Marcus didn't pause. The kiss was unhurried, grounded, chosen. Outside, city lights fractured across the water. Julian rested his forehead against Marcus's shoulder. For the first time, nothing was chasing him.
The city learned Julian Mercer again. Not through scandal this time, not through speculation or inheritance or controlled narratives, through absence. He stepped back from interviews, declined panels, refused to perform recovery as spectacle. The world expected triumph or vengeance. He offered neither. Instead, he rebuilt quietly. Mornings began without alarms, without medication trays arranged by unseen hands, without the subtle pressure of being needed by everyone except himself. Julian learned the sound of his own life. Coffee brewing in a kitchen that felt lived in. Footsteps that belonged to Marcus, unguarded and unmeasured. Windows left open without fear of who might be watching. It was slower than power. It was stronger. Marcus never moved in officially. There was no announcement, no defining moment, just a toothbrush that stayed, a jacket left over a chair, the easy assumption of presence. They shared space without merging identities. Some evenings they spoke little, others stretched late into the night, conversations folding into silence that felt earned rather than empty. Julian returned to work on his terms. He restructured the foundation, redirected funds, introduced transparency that made advisors uncomfortable and systems honest. People resisted, some left. Julian didn't stop them. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of what would collapse when control loosened. Marcus watched it all with quiet pride. "You're lighter," he said one night as they stood on the balcony.
Julian considered the word. I'm truer. The legal case concluded months later. The sentence was severe, the evidence undeniable. Evelyn Mercer did not look back when she was led away. Julian felt no satisfaction, only relief. Closure, he realized, wasn't a moment of triumph. It was the absence of something that no longer haunted your thoughts. That night, Julian slept deeply. no dreams. Spring arrived gently. They traveled without entourage, without itinerary. Cities became places again instead of stages. Julian rediscovered small preferences he hadn't known he'd buried. Window seats, quiet bookstores, walking instead of driving. Marcus never hovered, never shielded. He trusted Julian to navigate his own world now. That trust mattered more than protection ever had. One afternoon, months later, Julian stood in the kitchen watching Marcus read by the window. The sight struck him with unexpected force, not intensity, not urgency, permanence. Not guaranteed, not declared, chosen daily. Julian spoke without ceremony. I almost didn't survive, because I didn't think my life could belong fully to me. Marcus looked up. I won't make that mistake again.
Marcus closed the book. Neither will I. There was no dramatic promise, no oath, just agreement. Time moved on. News cycles replaced his story. New scandals rose. His name returned to footnotes rather than headlines. Julian welcomed the quiet. Years later, someone would ask how he knew when everything changed. Julian would think back, not to the night of exposure, not to the gala, not even to survival, but to the moment he realized safety wasn't something someone else provided. It was something you built with the people who stayed when they no longer had to. On an ordinary evening, as rain traced slow lines down the glass, Julian rested his head against Marcus's shoulder. "Thank you," he said softly. Marcus didn't ask for what. He knew. "You chose to live," Marcus replied. "I just walked with you." Julian smiled. Outside, the city glowed, vast, indifferent, alive. Inside, everything was enough.
If this story stayed with you, if even one moment made you pause, breathe deeper, or see something differently, then it mattered. Stories only live when they're shared, when someone else feels what you felt. So if this journey moved you, press like, not for the algorithm, but to let this story reach someone who might need it tonight. If you don't want to miss stories like this, stories about survival, choice, and quiet strength, subscribe and walk with us again. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what moment hit you the hardest? Or simply write, I stayed till the end. I read every comment, and your words keep these stories alive. Thank you for being here.